You from Clifton's Third Beach and take you to Leboa Kgomo, back to Victor Kgomoeswana. We've been talking about the 8 West African countries dropping the West African franc as their currency of choice. And Victor, you were talking about the significance of it all. This is the West African franc, which was the common currency for these 8 countries since about 1945. They've finally decided that they've had enough.
Yeah. And let's just remind the people why, Tulas, that 1945, that agreement, this was way of France relinquishing the colonial control, but not really doing it because they still appointed representatives to the monetary policy committees. Think about South Africa here making decisions about its own economy and the UK having to be represented on the decision-making structure. And, of course, that part about depositing 60% or so of their own reserves in the Central Bank of France. You are literally a colony of France, although you are supposed to be independent. So the symbolic value of this, especially because now we have the ECO, the Economic Community of West African States. These are 15 states. Adding these other states to the Union will give Africa one of those regionally integrated unions that could be more than 350 million people. Tulas, don't forget, we had the ratification of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement this year. And if that is going to work, we need more and more regional integration. And I believe that if there's one regional integration story that takes Africa closest to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, it's this decision. Because not only does it cut off France from controlling too much of what happens in West Africa, it forges closer unity among West African states. But also, Tulas, lastly, it removes that stigma of being Francophone or Lusophone or Anglophone. It becomes one region, West Africa. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, but you and I both, Victor, it is a development in the right direction. But I'm concerned, though, I must share with you, reading somewhere that France will continue, though, to play a role. It may not be that requirement that 50% of the foreign reserves of these countries are deposited in France, or the requirement that France appoints a French government representative onto the monetary policy committee structure of that regional, banking institution that was responsible for the franc. But they will continue to linger somewhere. They can nominate someone onto the monetary policy committee, and in fact, from one of the reports, they reserve the right to, at any stage, should there be a crisis, to then appoint someone onto the board. What's happening?
Because they are severing age-old links. In fact, let's cut to the chase about even South Africa. We might think we are free, but London still has a huge influence on what we do, even in our own reserve bank. And America has an influence. So because you are living in a global economy, Tulas, if you have been so linked to an economy like France, and it is so invested in the region, certainly they are not going to walk away. They are not disinterested, and they're not losing interest in the region, but they are acknowledging that the age-old linking of this 60% reserve is just not justifiable. So you can't sever it, because if you have traveled the continent, Tulas, when you are in Senegal, some of the Senegalese might as well consider themselves more French. And I'm not talking about what they are legally required to do. I mean the affinity to the French government, which means lots of the Senegalese, the Gabonese, still have their investments in France. And therefore, it is of interest to France to know who are the people that are involved, and what better way than to continue to do that. But whatever it is, symbolically and otherwise, it is a severing of ties. It is more and more independence. But total independence, we can forget it. We are still not totally independent of the UK ourselves here in South Africa.
All right, Victor, we'll have this conversation when you do come back from your time out. Thank you so much for taking the moment and having this conversation with me. That's Victor Kgomoeswana. We've been talking about there, and Victor alluding there to what is known as France Afrique, which is the continued influence of France in certain countries that are former French colonies. This in the context, of course, of the West African franc having been dropped by 8 West African countries. I tell you that I did use the West African franc when I visited Benin and Senegal all those years ago.